In this podcast, two Gen Xers are taking a trip down memory lane, revisiting and reflecting on the cinema of the 1980s. We'll look at the hits and the flops, the studio blockbusters and art house indies, the critically acclaimed, and the universally reviled. The series is hosted by me, Lisa Molinelli, a writer and librarian, and features Dustin Morrow, a filmmaker, author, and professor of film. So pull on your legwarmers, crank up your boombox, and hop in the DeLorean. It's time for the long rewind. Welcome to the long rewind. This is Lisa, and with me as always is Dustin, and we are here to talk to you today about the films of 1984 and the first half of 1984. Hi, Dustin.
Hello.
All right, shall we just get to it? This is gonna be a big one, 1984.
Yeah, this will be a long episode. This was the episode that I was sort of really looking forward to, but also kind of dreading because 1984 was sort of, I think for me it was like peak pop culture for the 1980s, just in terms of music and movies and television and everything. Like most of my favorite stuff was around in 84. So to talk about it is, in two episodes seems daunting, but we'll do it.
Yeah, and I think you're not alone there. I think a lot has been written about 1984 as a pop cultural time. So let's start with the news of 1984, shall we? Mm-hmm. The Winter Olympics were held in Sarajevo, Yugoslavia, which is now Bosnia and Herzegovina, from February 8th to February 19th. And this was the first time the Winter Olympics were hosted in a communist country. That was a big deal in the 80s. The Summer Olympics took place in Los Angeles, in the U.S. from July 28th to August 12th. Many countries, including the Soviet Union and other Eastern Bloc nations, boycotted these Olympics in response to the U.S.-led boycott of the 1980 Moscow Olympics. Again, the Cold War kind of rages on in the 80s here. Apple Inc. launched its iconic Mac personal computer on January 24th, introducing a graphical user interface and a mouse to the general public, and that definitely had some far-reaching impact, as we all know.
Do you remember what their first computer was called?
I think it was called Lisa, wasn't it?
It was indeed, yeah.
Much like your gentle host here.
Yep.
In the United Kingdom, the year marked the beginning of the year-long miners' strike, which was a major industrial action against proposed pit closures and job losses in the coal mining industry. And I think there's some movies that have been made about that.
Of course, yeah. Well, Full Monty kind of comes out of the sort of long-term effects of that. And
Brassed Off, wasn't that about?
Yeah, Brassed Off.
Specifically about the miners' strike.
Billy Elliot is about that in part. Yeah, so it was a big deal. I mean, it was Margaret Thatcher, England.
Yeah.
It was the Iron Lady. That Meryl Streep movie covers it too, I think.
Yeah, I mean we're talking about movies that are outside of the 80s, but that action in the 80s had a big impact on film as well. In Ethiopia, a severe famine known as the Ethiopian Famine, or the Famine of 1984 to 1985, unfolded, resulting in the loss of hundreds of thousands of lives. The international community responded with relief efforts, including the famous Live Aid concert organized by Bob Geldof and Midge Uri, which I think...
Again, it feels like that was like the peak musical event of the 1980s.
Yeah, it was a big one.
As an organized event. I mean, Live Aid was huge. And if you've never watched it, it's worth watching like in its entirety. It's available on DVD. You can get it on DVD. And it's just an amazing show. It's like every great artist of the 70s and 80s plays in that show.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, if you've seen...
And famously, Phil Collins plays in both Philadelphia and London because he jumps on the
now
Concorde.
Defunct Concorde, yeah. Well, and if you've seen, what is that movie called? Is it called Bohemian Rhapsody, the Queen movie of the last few years? You can see a sort of reproduction shot for shot, pretty much, of Queen's part in Live Aid.
Queen was kind of stole the show there.
Yeah. It's an amazing performance for sure. In the United States, Ronald Reagan was reelected as president, defeating Walter Mondale in the presidential election. So that, of course, had wide-ranging implications on the 1980s. The Cosby Show debuted, becoming one of the most popular sitcoms of the 1980s and portraying an affluent African-American family in a positive light. Miami Vice premiered, revolutionizing television with its stylized portrayal of undercover detectives in Miami, featuring a unique blend of music, fashion, and storytelling. And I'm sure Dustin has a lot to say about Miami Vice.
I can tell you a lot about Miami Vice, but I'll refrain
Yeah.
since this is a film podcast and we don't want this to be 9 hours long. But I'm a
Right.
big Miami Vice fan.
Well, and one thing I'll say about Miami Vice that I think you say a lot is, it's kind of like music videos, but as a TV show, right?
Well, famously, that was like the pitch when that was pitched to Brandon Tartikoff. It was the creator wrote MTV Cops on a napkin, and I don't know. I think this story's been debunked, but that's the story of how
it's
it
how
was
it
sort
plays,
of pitched and
whether
greenlighted.
that's true or not. Yeah. Finally, Sony launched the first consumer camcorder, the Betacam, revolutionizing home video recording. And anyone who grew up in the 1980s knows what a big deal the camcorder was. So,
and remembers the Beta versus VHS format wars. That Beta was famously a better quality, but VHS was cheaper and you could fit more material on one cassette, which is why it ultimately ended up winning. Cheaper always ends up winning.
Yeah,
right?
we all know who won that battle, at least those of us who have experienced VHS know.
So I'll walk you through some of the events of the world of film in 1984. In February, Disney established Touchstone Pictures to release more mature films that could be R-rated or PG-13, stuff they didn't want to put out under the Walt Disney banner, which they saved for family films. I'm sure you remember Touchstone Pictures and their logo. They had a very famous logo where this like sort of the words were created out of this blue ball, and then a lightning bolt goes through the words and then kind of strikes the ball, and they had their own kind of like stable of stars too. Like Richard Dreyfuss made a bunch of Touchstone movies. Bette Midler was probably their biggest name. Bette Midler made
she made so
Ruthless
many.
People, Outrageous Fortune, Down and Out in Beverly Hills. Shelley Long was
Big
in
business.
several movies for Touchstone. They're a big deal in the 80s. TriStar Pictures also was created that year, and if you are a kid of the 80s, you also know that logo, which is this horse that turns into Pegasus and leaps through the TriStar
It's like a
logo.
triangle.
I can hum the theme. Like these to both of these logos. They're like just burned in your head.
Yeah, these are just the logos just the logos themselves induce a feeling of nostalgia, at least for me.
Yeah.
So, yep.
TriStar got its name because it was a partnership of Columbia Pictures, HBO, and CBS.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Their first film was a remake of Where the Boys Are, which was an old like beach comedy, and it's a terrible sort of unknown movie to be your first movie. But there you go. In May, we got the first of our breakdancing musicals. Breakin' Canon Films, Menachem Golan released Breakin', and it became this surprise hit. It was made for like $5 and made a giant chunk of change. It was followed closely by Beat Street, which was a studio picture, and by a sequel, which he rushed into production and managed to get out like 6 months after the release of the original, which of course had the subtitle of Electric Boogaloo, which is the most famous whatever you call it, subtitle of probably any movie ever, and it has also become like shorthand for like as a way sequel. To talk about the 80s.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
Yeah. Electric Boogaloo is tossed around a lot.
I think people use it to refer to any kind of sequel, even if they don't really know what Breakin' 2 is. I feel like it's something people just say now, Yeah.
Especially like unnecessary sequels, right? Like, did we need another one of those? Yeah. I mean, I'll defend those movies to the grave. I think the first Breakin' is unbelievably fun. Breakin' 2 has its charms for sure. Beat Street is not quite as good, but it has a great soundtrack.
Yeah.
And breakdancing, it's hard to convey to people that weren't around in the 80s just what a big deal breakdancing was.
It really was.
I owned parachute pants. I had one of those. I had like a satin ball cap with the two things that hang down behind the two strips of material that hang down behind your neck. I used to tie a handkerchief around my knee.
Yep.
Like
these are breakdancing fashions if you're not aware.
And we're talking like I wasn't even a teenager. I wasn't even double digits yet. I was a little kid and I used to dress like this.
Oh yeah.
So it was everywhere in the culture. We all had giant boom boxes.
Yep.
Yeah, breakdancing was just huge. I remember there's one kid in my class that could do the worm.
Yep.
He was the only kid that could do it. I was so jealous that he could do the worm. Yeah.
I remember my younger brother doing a lot of breakdancing moves. That's just, he would just
I had
do it all the time.
I had a book that came with a cassette that was Learn How to Breakdance.
Nice.
And I got to tell you, it's very hard to learn how to dance from an audio cassette of somebody telling you how to do it.
Yeah. That's how it was back then. You didn't have YouTube to just go like figure out how to do the latest breakdancing moves. You had to listen to tape.
So the PG-13 rating came about in 1984 in large part because of movies like Gremlins and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, which were kind of marketed toward children but had stuff in them that kids really shouldn't have been seeing. So they created this new rating in between PG and R, and of course it's still around.
Yeah.
Ghostbusters came out. It became the biggest grossing comedy film of all time, exceeding Tootsie's box office gross. It was overtaken a year later by Beverly Hills Cop, and then retook the record after it was re-released a few months after Beverly Hills Cop. So it was a little battle between those two movies. It was also the biggest grossing film ever released by Columbia Pictures. And Michael Eisner, the famed head of Walt Disney, took that job that year. He left Paramount Pictures. He was the head of Paramount. He moved to Disney, became the CEO. He named Jeffrey Katzenberg the chairman. Katzenberg, of course, went on to found DreamWorks later on with Spielberg. Eisner was, for me, I don't know about you, Lisa, as a kid, he was like my first awareness of like the head of one of these companies, just because why would you know that as a little kid? But the reason we all knew it is because he hosted
Disney's Sunday Night Movie.
The Disney Sunday Night Movie. He would introduce them, and he would introduce himself as the head of Walt Disney. So for whatever reason, as a kid, I had an awareness of who Michael Eisner was.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. That is a little weird because I certainly didn't know any other heads of studios. Disney Sunday Night Movie. That's how I knew.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get into 84. The key films. I mean, there's a ton of them. It was just such a massive year for like films that were culturally important, that were important as indie films, that were blockbusters. Just so many blockbusters and movies that are still like just valued today enormously by everybody. Just like movies that are constantly being sequelized and rebooted to this day.
Yeah. I mean, I think something you pointed out to me about 1984 is if you actually look at the release calendar for this year, I mean, talk about that. Like looking at what was released on the same weekend is just wild.
Yeah, it's crazy. So you can find release calendars on several websites, including Wikipedia. And it's just an interesting exercise if you're a fan of 80s movies to just look at like the release calendar and look at what was coming out on a given weekend. Because on one weekend, you would have maybe 4 or 5 movies that are now considered stone cold classics that are still like absolutely revered to this day. And they came out on the same day, which is wild. I mean, nowadays, I don't want to be one of these people that's like all movies now are terrible and pop culture now sucks. Get off my lawn.
Right. Which, I mean, it's not true, of course. Yeah.
But like, we're lucky if we get 1 or 2 kind of really culturally important, amazing movies a year now. And
that's certainly
you can make the argument in the 80s that you were getting those on every weekend.
Yeah. I mean, time will tell. We won't know which movies of this year stand the test of time, but
it's just hard to imagine.
Yeah, it's
like
hard.
These movies were big deals then, too.
And
like,
they're still
there's
big
just
deals,
not much to even compare it to. Like like superhero movies. I mean, they kind of come and go, and there's so many of them. And
it's true.
I know that people love them, but it's hard to like. How can you lose your mind over a Spider-Man movie when there's a Doctor Strange movie coming out the next weekend, and the weekend after that you're getting a Superman movie? Like, it's not the same. Like Ghostbusters, The Karate Kid, Gremlins, Splash, Police Academy, Breakin', these movies just, Purple Rain, these movies just like were all we thought about that year. I mean, they were everywhere.
Yeah.
They stayed in theaters for months and months. That was another difference.
That's a good point.
Then and now.
I hadn't thought about that
they just hung around.
So
we didn't have as many sources of media then, because we didn't, you didn't have YouTube, you didn't have a million streaming channels, you didn't have a million cable channels even. This was before the era of 500 cable channels.
Yeah.
And so you had 3 networks, and those networks were covering these films. You had MTV, which was like where all young people focused their attention, and it was playing music videos from movies like Purple Rain and Footloose and Breakin'. And so it just, the culture seemed to be all about these things. Like you would go to McDonald's and there would be like a tie-in, souvenir glass for Indiana Jones.
Or the toy in the Happy Meal or
you would
whatever.
go to the toy store and all the toys were tied to these movies. And then you would, it was just...
Merch was big in the 80s. I mean, it is now too.
It was all over the mall. All these movies were all over the mall.
Yep.
We would, we got those, what do they call them? When you were in school, you would get those those things you would order books from, like the little book club.
Those little Scholastic book
Scholastic book club.
Fairs,
Yeah, for I don't know if they still have those now.
I don't know either. It's a really good question.
I don't think they do.
I'm not sure.
And then once a year, there would be like the Scholastic Book Fair that would take over your library where you would go in. And these movies were all over those things. There were all these like tie-in sort of novelizations, but also like storybooks. And just like collector's books. I remember there being just like dozens and dozens of E.T. themed books that were always in those like Scholastic flyers that you could order books from.
Well, and you're reminding me of another way we used to relive movies back then too, which was the book with the cassette, where the cassette would read the book to you and you would turn the page on the beep or whatever. And I feel like a lot of, not all of those, but a lot of those were movie related or movie tie-ins. So you'd kind of relive the movie.
Those were great. I forgot about those. I had a bunch of those. My favorite one was Indiana Jones because they always used a sound effect to tell you when to turn the page.
Oh,
so it would be at the sound of the whip.
Right.
Turn the page. So it'd be like, and then Indiana pulled out his gun and shot a guy. Whoosh.
Yeah. And then the one I remember was, I don't think this is a movie we've come to yet, but The Black Cauldron, the animated film. I had a book of that I used to listen to and read a lot. So the movie tie-in cassette books were, I don't know what you'd call them, but they were kind of a big deal, a way to relive things.
I mean, for kids, for younger kids or younger people, I'm saying kids, but we could be talking about 40-year-old millennials. For people that don't know what those are, they were essentially like, it was a read along, right?
Yeah.
So he would read, you put the cassette in and you would hear a voice read, and they would have sound effects. I had a Return of the Jedi one that you had all the sound effects and the music.
Yeah, there would be like stuff from the movie on the cassette in a way, right? Like you're saying, like sound effects or music or things that would remind you of the movie.
It was also a way, I was listening to some podcast not too long ago where the hosts were talking about how hard it was in that era or more challenging it was to kind of take the movie home with you in a way and relive it.
So that's what
it wasn't
thinking,
like,
right?
It didn't go from the theater to streaming in 45 days.
Oh, no.
Like it took about 6 months for a movie to move from the theater to VHS. And then another like 6 months to move to cable. So it would show up on cable like a year after it was in the theater on HBO.
Right.
And then it would take like another 6 months to a year after that before it would show up on network television. So by the time you saw something on network TV, it was 2 years old.
Yeah.
And so, the guys on the podcast used to say they would sneak cassette recorders in and just record the dialogue and then just record it, kind of like a bootleg.
Yeah, but not visual.
But just getting the audio.
Sound.
Just as a way to like relive and enjoy the movie.
So interesting.
So
wow.
Those storybooks were kind of like that because they had music and they had like the sound of Luke Skywalker's lightsaber.
And you also had images from the film usually in the book, right? Yeah. So you're getting kind of both. They're just separate. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just a memory I have. Sorry. I know we need to talk about the actual films, but that was something that just came to mind talking about that.
I'm looking at these and thinking like, is there even a way to group these? I wrote 20 titles down because there were so many important movies. I guess we just start racing.
Yeah. Let's just
racing through them. Mm-hmm. Maybe on the fly, I can think of ways.
Yeah.
To put these. Well, I can see like MTV movies, right? That's kind of a thing.
Well, I was thinking music and dancing were kind of big.
So Footloose, of course, which I teach a course at my university in music video production and culture and history. And I have my students watch Footloose in that class as like the first true MTV movie. And I realized that that's not even fair necessarily because Flashdance came out before Footloose, and Flashdance is kind of an MTV movie as well. But Footloose is constructed largely of music videos. There's all these scenes in the movie where characters are not singing in the films. The music's not diegetic in the sense it is that they play music, they listen to music. The kids in Footloose listen to music, but they're not singing. So it's not like a traditional musical.
Right. There's sort of montages often.
Yeah, and it's
music.
just these very contained sequences that could almost be lifted out of the movie and function by themselves as music videos. Like, for example, Let's Hear It for the Boy, where Kevin Bacon teaches Chris Penn how to dance.
Yeah.
You could just take that scene out of that movie and plop it on MTV, and it could function as a music video. And that film is just is constructed of those. Purple Rain is kind of that way too.
Yep.
Purple Rain just like stops every like 8 to 12 minutes for a song,
performance,
right?
or
For like a complete song. Yeah, it's almost a concert film in a sense, because he's always on stage and he's
Prince, that is,
performing these songs. Yeah,
if you don't know Purple Rain, I mean that was something I noticed as a thread too this year was just you got Footloose, you got Purple Rain, you got so many of these music and dance MTV, as you're saying, movies. Yeah, it's really true.
Spinal Tap was this year too, which was a spoof of hair metal specifically, but kind of 80s music and the kind of adoration of the image that the 80s brought about, as opposed to the 70s, where you could be an ugly person and still
mattered
have a
less,
huge,
perhaps.
You
how
could be
you
Meatloaf
looked.
and still have a huge career, right? But the 80s put a lot of sort of emphasis on what you looked like and how you dressed videos, and how you presented yourself and that sort of thing. And there's a lot of sort of mocking of that in Spinal Tap, and this band is having a hard time managing that transition.
Yeah, Spinal Tap is so great. Gosh, I love Spinal Tap.
Yeah, it's just also one of the all-time funniest movies ever made. And of course, the aforementioned Breakin' and Beat Street, which we don't need to go into more, but our Breakin' especially is just a very ebullient. Is that the right word?
Delightful.
It's just a very
it's
just a
delightful
movie. It's dumb as a box of rocks, but like it kind of knows it and there's just a lot of I don't know how you could watch that movie and not have some fun with it.
Absolutely.
You're a sad person if you can watch Breakin' and just be grumpy.
It really is joyful and sort of almost life affirming, if I may.
Yeah.
And let's not, I can maybe call out, actually that's for later in the show. I was thinking of a rewindable moment for a break. There's so many in Breakin', but anyway, it's such a fun movie. You should see it if you haven't. I really think,
So I'm also seeing like another genre that was just big in the 80s in general, which is the teen movie.
Oh,
like really great teen movies. So 16 Candles, which was John Hughes' first outing as a director. Was this year.
I didn't know that was his first. Okay, that's cool.
He had been writing screenplays before, but 16 Candles was the first thing he directed. And, it was the first Molly Ringwald, John Hughes kind of connection.
Who often feels like his muse. I don't know if that's
she certainly
the case,
was, until they had a falling out.
It
was her and him. He famously wrote the screenplay with her headshot on the wall in front of him. He had never met her. He just found her headshot in the casting office.
Oh, weird. Oh, wow.
And he was like, "Oh my God, this is the character," and he wrote it while looking at her.
Because Molly Ringwald wasn't Molly Ringwald at that time. I would assume. I think she'd probably been in things, but she wasn't like the way she became after all the John Hughes movies.
She's very cute, but she was
not the typical 80s like teen queen kind of person.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Revenge of the Nerds was 1984. That was a huge hit. Generally remembered as kind of a lowbrow comedy in the vein of like Porky's, but actually is a much better movie than that. It's a lot more, it's very funny. And there's a lot of lowbrow stuff in it, but it's actually a little more thoughtful than maybe you would think it was if you hadn't seen it in a long time or if you've never seen it. And I'm a big fan of it. I also like the idea of the nerd was an 80s thing too, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's how I see it, is that's kind of when that Avatar or not Avatar. That's not the word I'm looking for. That icon, the icon of the nerd, kind of became a thing. The archetype's the word I'm looking for. That seemed to become a thing in the 80s.
It was long before nerds were considered cool.
Yeah.
And like, sure, like they did grow up to own everything, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and what have you, but not by this point.
Oh, no. No.
So they had yet to sort of take over the world. And I feel like nerd cool has been a thing for many years now.
Probably
but
decades at this point.
As a young nerd, I have to say, times were tough back when I was.
I mean, it was very jocks
younger.
versus nerds.
You were just
back
trying
then.
to not get like thrown in the bushes by a bunch of jocks, and maybe it's still that way, but it doesn't seem like it culturally.
It's hard to know. I mean, I don't really know, but jocks versus nerds was a big thing back then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another big teen movie this year was, of course, The Karate Kid.
Oh, love The Karate Kid.
One of the great underdog movies ever made. Directed by John Avildsen, who made the original Rocky. So that's a guy that
I don't think I knew that.
Yep.
That makes
just
total
understands.
sense. Yeah.
It's also one of the few kind of 80s reboots in the form of Cobra Kai that's actually any good.
The Cobra Kai show on Netflix is a reboot of not a reboot, but
like that show.
Ish.
I don't know that I've been more shocked by a piece of media in recent years than
I was
Cobra
super
Kai, because I just thought when I
Yeah.
heard about it, I was like, well, that's gonna suck, because that's a story that absolutely did not need updating. That movie had an ending. It didn't need sequels, although the sequels are fun in their own way. I know you're
I am a big Karate Kid 2 fan. Yeah, I know.
I was just like, it can't be. There's no way it's going to be any good. And it wasn't. It was not only like good, it was like really good.
Yeah. I was really, because I think you and I both have a great love for the original Karate Kid franchise and Ralph Macchio and all that stuff. And so it was really hard to think that this was going to be good. But Cobra Kai's great.
It did jump the shark fairly quickly, like after maybe the end of season 2.
It's still fun, but
it is still fun. The first couple seasons were great.
Actually,
in a way
really, really good.
Subsequent seasons have maybe not been.
Yep.
The other big teen movie that I noticed this year was Last Starfighter.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a good movie.
Yeah, directed by Nick Castle, who was Michael Myers in the original Halloween.
That blew my mind when you told me that. It's so hard to imagine.
Yeah, I mean, it's not because he was any kind of actor or anything.
Right.
It's just he was good friends with John Carpenter. So
that's why he became Michael Myers.
Yeah, that's why he had that part. That shows you what a homemade movie Halloween was, that he just cast his pal as the villain.
Yeah.
But The Last Starfighter, which was then, hasn't been rebooted officially yet, but I'm kind of surprised about that.
Yeah, tell people, I think that might be one that people maybe know less.
It was stolen completely by the guy that wrote Ready Player One, Ernest Cline.
Oh,
he wrote a book that was just an absolute,
very similar,
complete rehash of Last Starfighter.
Yeah, that might. I'm just saying, a lot of the ones we've talked about, I think people know, but maybe people don't know The Last Starfighter as well. Do you want to say a little bit about what that's about?
Oh yeah, it's an incredible premise. It's there's an intergalactic war going on, and the good guys are running out of pilots to fight in the war, and so one of the ways they recruit is by putting games on other planets to see how people are playing them. And so that takes the form on Earth of an arcade game.
Oh, okay, that's right. It's different planets.
So there's this kind of kid that has, big dreams, but has limited resources. He lives in a trailer park.
Yeah.
And he's just really great at this arcade game, and they come down and they recruit him, and he finds out that the arcade game was essentially a training device to ready him to fight in a real spaceship, which is what the arcade game has you doing. It's just one of those kind of like borderline Disney. It's just like it has 80s magic sprinkled all over it.
I was going to say, you're describing it, and I'm like, this is such a quintessentially 80s movie. It has all the ingredients of the 80s, basically.
Well, I've said this, I think, in past episodes, but one of the things that I think separates movies targeted at young people in the 80s from other decades is how Well, A, they didn't talk down to them. They weren't juvenile movies. The Last Starfighter can be watched by anyone of any age and you will love it. Even if you're just seeing it for the first time.
I saw it
when
for the
you're
first
like
time 70, as an adult.
You'll love it.
Yeah, yeah.
So they were not like intentionally dumb. They weren't full of fart jokes or like, kids with potty mouths or anything like that. The other thing is that the kids were the heroes. So you get movies like Monster Squad or The Goonies or any of a million other movies targeted at kids in the 80s, and they cast the kids as able to outwit the adults, and they were able to do it in a way that wasn't stupid. Again, it wasn't like they, set a bag of crap on fire and threw it on their doorstep or whatever. It was, they were smart kids.
They were really working it out. They were working the problems
things.
out. Yeah.
And Last Starfighter is a great example of that. It's one of my favorite movies.
It's really
of all
wonderful.
Time. Yeah. There were some big hits this year. I mean, Ghostbusters. I don't know what else there is to say about Ghostbusters at this point. They're still making Ghostbusters movies to this day.
The only thing I'd say is if you haven't seen Ghostbusters, do yourself a favor.
Everybody's
It's
seen
amazing.
Ghostbusters by this point, yeah.
But I mean,
it's my first memory of having to sit in the front row.
That's always the worst.
Yeah,
to me,
I was like a little kid. I wasn't even double digits in 84,
wow.
So I was really young, but I have this potent memory of going to that theater and it being so crowded and being like, whoa, I didn't realize movies could be this popular. And we had to sit in the front row, which I hated, even at that age.
It's the worst. I mean, Ghostbusters was... I can't even tell you guys, so huge. And it was a bit of that's one of those genre busters, right? That was kind of a thing of the 80s, wasn't it? The sort of genre mix up, genre busting.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And Ghostbusters was definitely one of those and one of the most successful probably.
Yeah. Gremlins was a big hit this year. Totally delightful holiday, dark comedy, very Joe Dante. If you go on to watch other Joe Dante movies, you're like, oh, okay, I get it. I could see how Gremlins is a Joe Dante movie.
Do our younger listeners know Gremlins? Do you think that's a movie people know as well? I mean, Ghostbusters, I feel like people know. You think people know Gremlins?
So.
Okay.
Don't you think so? I mean, they haven't remade it, I don't think. But
it's also kind of a surprise now that I think about it. But.
Yeah, I think there's a cartoon version of it on one of the streaming services.
I mean, it's basically cute little critters that potentially could go bad if you do the wrong. Yeah. If you take care of them. I mean,
as we mentioned earlier, it's PG-13. It's a surprisingly nasty movie.
Yeah.
You might think twice before sitting a real little kid down in front of it.
It can be very
scary.
Yeah.
Yeah, a couple other big comedies came out this year. Police Academy, which was huge, went on to spawn like 8 or 9 sequels.
Those were big.
The original is still, I think, very funny. And I don't know, as a person who discovered it when I was the right age to discover it, I think it's funny.
What did you say? Like the baseline age of that movie is like 12-year-old boy.
It's a great movie for 12-year-old boys. And to the degree that there's still a 12-year-old boy inside me, I still find Police Academy hilarious.
Still funny too.
But there you go.
Folks. Yep.
Splash.
Yep.
Was 84, which is a very charming romantic comedy.
Do folks know
early movie from? I want to say it was his second movie.
Tom Hanks.
Ron Howard.
Ron Howard. Sorry.
Yeah, he made Night Shift, which I think is his first movie.
Yeah.
And then he did Splash.
Yeah.
Which is a mermaid comedy with Daryl Hannah and Tom Hanks and a very, very funny John Candy who kind of steals the movie.
Yeah.
Eugene Levy. I watched Splash 100 million times as a kid. I could recite Splash.
Yeah. I mean, Splash is interesting to me because I think I don't know if it started or just landed in the middle of what ended up being sort of a mermaid craze for little girls back then. I mean, you guys probably know that there's been a bit of a recent mermaid craze in pop culture. They sort of come in waves, haha. But I just remember at that time in sort of the mid 80s that mermaids were big with little girls. And so Splash definitely helped with that. Yeah. I think. Yeah. Not that it's a little kids movie. It really isn't. It's fairly adult in its themes, but kids watched it. Yeah. For sure. Yeah. Was that early in Tom Hanks's career? Like where did this help launch him? Like what would you say?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. Is this his first big screen leading role? It might have been.
I'm not sure.
It was around the Bosom Buddies time. This was very early. He's incredibly funny in it.
Yeah.
It's a great physical performance too by him.
I mean, just think about all the, you've got Splash, you've got Ghostbusters, things that a lot of the people we know today as like uber famous kind of were getting their big breakouts in 1984. If you think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And these guys are still around, which is another thing you kind of hear about from time to time, that we don't get movie stars now in the same way that we did then. Like there aren't new movie stars. Like it's impossible to birth new movie stars now in the same.
It feels that way. I mean, we won't know till decades from now.
Well, part
probably,
of the evidence is that people use is that the biggest movie stars now are from earlier generations.
Right.
So
I mean, Tom Hanks is still
Tom
huge.
Cruise,
Yeah,
who's
Tom
a boomer.
Cruise. Mm-hmm.
Tom Hanks, who's a boomer.
Yep.
It's Bill Murray's still
all the guys in
Ghostbusters,
Ghostbusters, or many of the guys in Ghostbusters.
And then like Will Smith,
right.
who might be an Xer. I think he is.
I think
he's
so.
a Gen X.
Anyway,
it's
but
like, a lot of the guys that are still demanding the sort of like $50 million paychecks are
and who
from
who they are.
Generations. Yeah.
And many generations know who these people are. Yeah.
So Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom came out this year. I saw this in the theater. I saw it as a super little kid, and it didn't freak me out in any way. But, it was famously one of the first PG-13 movies, and it was a movie that Spielberg famously doesn't really like. He's publicly said he made the third one to apologize for the second one.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, there's some crazy stuff in it. People having their hearts ripped out, people being sacrificed into fiery pits. I mean, there's stuff in there. It's definitely not as gentle as Raiders of the Lost Ark. But it's a super fun movie. And I feel like kids, especially boys my age, really love it. And there's a lot of like Gen X guys whose favorite Indiana Jones movie is Temple of Doom.
So can you because I think I probably said this last time we talked about Indiana Jones, I always have a hard time parsing the Indiana Jones. They kind of run together for me. Which one is Temple of Doom? What are the touchstones of Temple of Doom? Remind me.
Well, it's
the visuals that are
it's the one with Kate Capshaw and Short Round, Ki Hai Kwan, and they crash in India, and he ends up going to this palace to save all the village's children have been stolen by these villains, and he goes to recover this valuable stone and also to save all the children of the village.
There's always a valuable stone.
He discovers this murderous cult underground where they sacrifice people. They try to sacrifice Kate Capshaw.
I remember which one this is now. I mean, again, it's not that I don't remember Indiana Jones. It's just I sometimes have a hard time separating out the one with the boulder and the one with Short Round and the one I just have a hard time. So.
Yeah, I loved it as a kid. I definitely, as an adult, I see a lot more flaws in it, and it's probably my third favorite Indiana Jones movie after the first and third one. But but it it was a big deal and it was a huge hit. A couple of smaller movies that have just had a lasting impact. Once Upon a Time in America, which is a Sergio Leone organized crime epic about Jewish gangsters in New York with Robert De Niro and James Woods, is just a really great movie. It came out in a studio edited truncated form in 1984 and got terrible reviews, and then was re-released a while later with like an additional 90 minutes of footage, and then was heralded as a masterpiece. So it's a great example of like, let the filmmaker make the film. And then another one, Repo Man, which is British director Alex Cox, who's a legendary kind of punk rock filmmaker, made this movie about repo men in Los Angeles with Harry Dean Stanton and Emilio Estevez, and it's one of the all-time great cult movie comedies. Really, just a great movie. The Natural, one of the greatest sports movies ever, came out this year, about a rookie baseball player who's shot by a woman before he and kind of forced to disappear. Yeah, and then tries to make a comeback and become a rookie essentially. Yeah, in his
Robert
40s.
Redford is the
Robert
rookie,
Redford.
by the way. Yeah,
Just a beautiful movie,
It's
like
beautiful.
really
yeah.
beautiful, with like Glenn
It's
Close
wonderful.
and Robert Duvall and Wilford Brimley, and
It's
just
almost
this
a dreamy
unbelievably
movie.
beautiful score
Yeah.
by Randy Edelman, and
It's lovely.
yeah, just an incredibly beautiful movie. I taught a sports film
Mm-hmm.
class at my university too, and I taught The Natural, and none of the kids had seen it, and they all loved it.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah,
it's a very
good.
old-fashioned movie. It almost feels like a movie from like the 40s or
Yeah.
50s.
I mean, I love that.
So,
So,
yeah, it
love
holds
that.
up.
Great. So good.
Against All Odds was a remake of a noir. I think it's a remake of Out of the Past. It's Jeff Bridges, James
Yeah.
Woods again.
Right.
Had I think that song won the Oscar. I mean, you'll tell us in the
Yeah,
next
we'll know.
episode.
We'll
I
find out
guess.
next
but
time.
yeah, it's a famous Phil Collins song. Star Trek 3: The Search for Spock came out this year. That was a big hit. The Muppets Take Manhattan.
Yay!
The third Muppet movie.
That's one of
which
my
Lisa
very
really
favorites.
loves.
I
I
love
love
that
it too. I was a huge fan. It's the one that brought us Muppet Babies,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
which became a gigantic cartoon.
It sure did. Yeah. Love Muppets Take Manhattan.
And then the last one I had was Romancing the Stone.
Yeah,
which was
I was
also
waiting for this to come up.
A big blockbuster hit, unexpected
Yeah.
hit this year.
Another genre
Also
buster.
happens to be my favorite movie.
It is your favorite movie.
So yeah, here's where I plug my book. If you, I wrote a book with Kathleen Turner, who is my favorite actress of all time.
She's in Romancing the Stone with Michael Douglas.
It's called Kathleen Turner on Acting. And if you want to read me go on and on and on about how great Romancing the Stone is, you can get that book. Or if you want to hear me go on about how great it is, you can listen to the audiobook that Kathleen and I read together. And you can listen to her sultry, sexy voice and my sultry, sexy voice.
Can you give the people just a small, like, two sentence taste of why you love Romancing the Stone, though? Just give us a little elevator pitch as to why it's the best.
It's just the thing that I don't think I should say this. I don't think it's the best film ever made. When people ask me that, I always say Taxi Driver and Rear Window, which I actually think are the best two movies, and the Up film series. Those are the best movies ever made. Romancing the Stone is my favorite movie because it does the thing that I love best about filmmaking, which is that it transports me out of my head and it takes me out of my life and into a different world. And I had a transformative experience seeing it. I still remember where I was sitting in the theater and what theater I saw it in. And I was a really little kid. And I remember being snapped out of the film at the end when the end credits came on, almost like a rubber band is how I would describe it, where I had completely forgotten entirely, 100% fully that I was in a movie theater. I was inside that movie. And I remember having this feeling of profound sadness when it was over. I wanted to be back in the movie. I wanted to live inside the movie and continue to follow these two characters on their adventures. And that's the cheesy romantic explanation of why I love it and still love it, because I still kind of get that feeling even though I've seen it probably over 150 times maybe.
How wonderful. Yeah.
But beyond that, like, I could go into, like, I think the performances are incredible. I think it's directed great. I love the locations. I love the music. I love the pace of it. I love the old fashionedness of it. I love its kind of swashbuckling spirit.
Yeah.
I think it's got just an incredible script. I love the story of how it was made. I love the Diane Thomas story. She's the screenwriter.
Yep. Well, tell the folks just a little about, what this movie's about. Tell us what it's about quickly.
Well, I mean, people know what Romancing the Stone's about. I will tell you that the story of Diane Thomas was a waitress working in a restaurant in Malibu when she would work on this screenplay in the early morning hours or after work late at night, and had never written anything professionally ever. And her story is very much kind of like Joan Wilder. She was kind of a shrinking violet, kind of a mousier lady, and by her own admission.
Joan Wilder's the lead character.
Yeah,
Romancing the Stone, Kathleen Turner's character.
And she got the script to Michael Douglas and some other people, and there was a big bidding war over it. And Michael Douglas won the rights, and he wanted Jack Nicholson to star in it, and he wanted Clint Eastwood to star in it, and all these guys wouldn't do it. And so finally, he decided to do it himself, even though he wasn't really acting at that point in his career.
Right.
And it made his career. It took Kathleen Turner and took her from being pigeonholed into playing femme fatale roles because she was so big in body into being able to play basically anything she wants.
Yep.
It just did a lot of great stuff for a lot of great people in their careers. Back to the Future would not exist without Romancing the Stone because Robert Zemeckis' career was kind of he was like persona non grata at that point because he had just made a couple of bombs and used cars and I Want to Hold Your Hand, and nobody would hire him, and Michael Douglas hired him because he liked used cars, and Romancing Stone was a big hit, and that enabled him to dust off Back to the Future, which he had written earlier and nobody wanted. After Romancing Stone came out and was a big hit, all of a sudden people were interested in Back to the Future. So it just was. It's just a great movie. They've threatened to remake it a few times over the years. I'm glad they haven't. It'll probably get remade at some point because everything does. But I don't know that its magic is going to be replicable ever.
Yeah. It's a good lesson, and you just never know when things are going to happen for you in terms of these people's careers and how things worked out. And it's an amazing movie.
Did you have any other key films that I missed?
Oh, well, before we move on, I just want to say this is another one of those genre-busting movies, I think, of this year and of the 80s, which again, I feel like this year and the 80s are that time when people started to really mix genres. It's got that kind of romance, adventure, comedy thing that people weren't really doing, right? This kind of launched that type of movie.
Sure. This movie is one of the first
which is huge.
That.
Yeah.
And did it and does every genre so well. I mean, that's the thing about a lot of these movies, like if they're, an action / romantic comedy, like the action might be great and the romantic comedy maybe less so. And one of the things I love about Romancing the Stone is I think that it does all of those genres equally well.
It's
true. The rare romantic comedy that's actually romantic.
Yep.
And steamy and sexy.
Yeah.
The comedy is really funny.
Yep.
The action is phenomenal.
Actually great. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just a great,
good.
There's suspense elements. It almost turns into a horror film for 5 minutes at the end. Like there's just a lot of great, shifting going on, and it's all utterly fluid and seamless.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't gush on it, or this podcast be 9 hours long.
Well, I felt like it was worth discussing, and see it if you haven't.
What about Unsung Gems?
Yeah, because I don't have any. You hit all the key. I think we both hit all the key films. I have hidden gems. I'm just saying we don't. I think we covered all the key films.
Yeah,
I'm definitely. I've got some hidden gems here. Yeah. Reckless, which I think is. It's sort of one of the MTV films in a way, right? It's
sure.
Let's talk about Reckless a little bit. And let's let folks know what this is.
Yeah, tell them what it is.
So Reckless, well, you know more about the people behind this movie, but Reckless is a movie about teenagers living in like Steel Mill, Pennsylvania, right? This sort of small town. And it's kind of about the sort of angsty teens in the high school. And it's sort of like good girl on the right side of the tracks, bad boy from the wrong side of the tracks. They kind of meet and...
He rides a motorcycle. He wears a black leather jacket. She's a
pearls
princess.
and twin
she's
sets,
blonde.
basically.
She's a cheerleader. It's a total update of the 1950s juvenile delinquent like biker movies.
Which I mean, there's a lot of that 50s to 80s thing happening in the 80s. But so this is Daryl Hannah as the girl and Aidan Quinn.
Yep.
Did I have that right? As the boy. And it's just sparks fly. I mean, it's really fun.
It's a very stylish movie. It's directed by James
stylish.
Foley, who is a very stylish filmmaker from that era. He made At Close Range and a bunch of other great movies.
Oh, gosh. So good. Yeah.
It's a first screenplay, I think, by Chris Columbus.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
He went on to make the Harry Potters and Adventures
So many
in
other
Babysitting and
things.
Gremlins.
Yeah.
So he doesn't like the movie, but there it is.
I like it. It's
great. I do too. I think it's a great movie. And it's got like, as long as we're talking sexy, I think it's got one of the sexiest sequences ever where they break into this school.
Yep.
And it's just the two actors have a lot of chemistry and the use of music and light and composition.
Yeah.
And I won't.
The pool, the swimming pools involved.
I'm too good a Midwestern boy to go in to the details of why
Right.
it's so steamy and hot, but it really is.
But it's not
Yeah.
explicit either.
No,
Like it's
it
not
isn't.
an explicit movie at all, but it is very steamy. There's that really fun school dance scene
Yep,
too, with that really the way they shoot. There's one song they play where the two leads, I think they dance together maybe for the first time. It's a fast song, it's not a slow song, and the camera like spins around them. It's
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good.
Other gems of the year.
Other gems. Iceman, if I'm remembering that one.
Yeah.
Can you? I'm not sure I'm remembering the right film here. What is Iceman? I think
It's
I know.
about a guy who gets struck by lightning, and then he can shoot ice out of his fingers.
That's not what it is.
No, it's not at all. It's about.
Isn't this the one? The guy who's he's a.
It's
like
a caveman movie.
Yeah,
So they find a Neanderthal man
Yes.
frozen in ice.
Okay, this is what I thought it was. Good.
And they thaw him out, and he's alive. And they put him in this like kind of like a zoo almost.
In a
this,
habitat, yeah.
habitat. And they study him, and it's a all of that sounds like.
It sounds like it'd be crazy and awful, but it's actually really sweet and thoughtful.
It's a very thoughtful, very
pensive.
smart, very reflective, very low key.
Like, should
drama.
we be doing this? You know, they're interacting with him and just wondering if this is the right thing to do. I can't
It's a
remember
lovely movie.
who. I remember being really lovely and really liking it. Who's in this one again?
Timothy Hutton, Lindsay Krause, and
Yeah.
the Iceman is played by John Lone, Japanese actor. I think.
Okay, yeah, it's really great. I know I sounded like I didn't remember it. I just wasn't sure if I had the right movie, but that is the movie I'm thinking of, and it's really lovely and wonderful and very thoughtful.
Another great gem from this year that had a similar tone, took a story that has been done usually in very fantastical ways and did it in a way that was sort of realistic and restrained and lovely. It was Greystoke, the Legend of Tarzan.
I had that too.
It's a Christopher Lambert movie with Ian Holm
From
and Andy
Highlander.
McDowell.
Yeah.
And it's a very, if you're used to like, as I think people were at that time, like really corny versions of Tarzan. It's an unusual movie because it's sort of like, well, what would really happen?
It's almost a more
somebody
realistic
Yeah,
version
exactly.
of the Tarzan story, kind of. I mean,
And it's also kind of like a British costume drama.
Yeah.
It's almost like a Merchant Ivory's Tarzan.
yeah, it is. And of course, I like it for that reason.
Yeah, I really like it a lot. I'm a big
I like
fan
it
of
too. I'm a big fan.
Yeah.
We got to talk about Streets of Fire,
Yeah.
don't you think?
Yeah. I mean, one of my all-time favorite movies,
Mine
period.
too. Yeah, I love it.
It was on HBO a million every hour on the hour when I was a little kid. So that's how I found it. That's how everybody found it because it was a bomb in theaters. Which
is shocking.
It's
it's so
really
good.
hard movie to describe,
Yeah,
but it's
we'll have to
essentially
try.
kind of like a 50s rock and roll juvenile delinquent action movie mixed with kind of like a magic realism / science fiction fantasy night, but also like MTV.
It's got almost a comic book
80s.
vibe to it too, a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. It's Walter Hill who made The Warriors.
Yeah.
So a very stylish filmmaker.
It's even got a Warriors vibe to it.
Yeah, it
a little
does.
bit.
And
Yeah.
The Warriors, he envisioned that movie as a comic book. And so he clearly likes that sort of thing.
that
But
aesthetic, yeah.
it's a very simple story about a rock and roll singer who's kidnapped by
The rock
a
and roll
biker
singer is
gang.
Diane Lane.
And then
It's a woman.
her
Yeah.
soldier of fortune ex-boyfriend comes home to
Yep.
go rescue her with
Yeah.
this sort of motley crew of people that he teams up with to
Michael
go save her.
Pare of Eddie and the Cruisers.
It has music by Jim Steinman, who wrote all of Meatloaf's songs. He wrote all the Bad
Yeah.
Out of Hell songs, and so they're just these giant, bombastic, wonderful.
Oh my God,
80s
they're
rock
so
songs.
good. Yeah, so good.
And then there's all these sort of like 1984 MTV pop songs mixed into like I Could Dream About You. And
Oh yeah,
it's like, it's an unbelievably, the reason it's so hard to describe is because there's literally no other movie like it.
yeah.
Period.
That's
It's just,
true.
it is one of the movies that is truly unique. And there's not very many of those.
Yeah, I mean, you should just go watch a trailer of Streets of Fire if you want to know whether it would be interesting to you. I think It's so, but I mean, I think you should just watch it. It's so great. It's Diane Lane as the rock star. It's Michael Pare of Eddie and the Cruisers as the sort of soldier of fortune ex-boyfriend. Willem Dafoe is the villain in a crazy outfit.
Crazy haircut.
Lots
Rick
of
Moranis is her manager.
That's right. It's her
an
manager
incredible
boyfriend.
Amy Madigan as the sidekick soldier.
She's
a character that was written for a man.
She's so great. Yeah. She's so good. And Robert Townsend is in the what's the name of the group? Why can't I should really know that. The Sorrells. There's
they're like the Temptations.
4-person sort of Temptations group. Robert Townsend's in that group.
Just
go
a great movie.
It. Yeah, it's so good.
Okay, I'm going to bring up a couple of comedies.
Yeah,
too,
please.
A couple of romantic comedies from this year that I think not a lot of people know about, but which are great.
Please.
Electric Dreams.
Yes. Also on my list.
Which is a movie about a guy who gets a home computer. This is back when that was kind of unusual.
Weird. Yeah.
And, as we established, 84 was the introduction of the Lisa and Apples for some computers. So he brings home a home computer to help organize his life. And a beautiful cellist moves in upstairs and into the apartment upstairs. And both he and the computer fall in love with the cellist and end up kind of competing over her. It's kind of a weird, dark comedy and a very early addressing of technology and the sort of like personification of technology that can happen, and it's wildly ahead of its time.
Really, let's also mention. Did you say that this movie's set in San Francisco, which I think is so interesting? I don't know if that was purposeful or not, but
I'm sure it was. Yeah.
Silicon Valley and all
it's
that.
It's a very unusual. The tone of it's very strange, and
is.
it's very stylish, and has a lot of great MTV, a lot of great pop music.
Yeah,
from that era, Thompson Twins music, and
I love this movie. It's great.
Yeah, it's just a lot of fun. The computer is voiced by Bud Cort, who is Harold in Harold and Maude.
Yeah.
The other one I want to bring up is The Lonely Guy, which is even lesser known.
Yeah.
It was based on a best-selling comedy book by, I think, Bruce Allen Friedman called The Lonely Guy's Guide to Life, which is a book that the character in the movie actually ends up writing. It's a very strange blending of the...
That sounds very now, doesn't it?
It's very meta.
Yeah.
It's a Steve Martin comedy, and it's really just an unbelievably funny, fast 90-minute. It's a movie with a very high ratio of jokes to successful jokes. Like most of the jokes in it land. They're really funny and they come fast. Almost like the Airplane movies or The Naked Gun or that. Although it's not quite that.
No, it's
insane.
not that kind of. For the most part, it's not that kind of humor. There's a little of that.
But it's just very fast. It reminds me of Neil Simon, kind of. It's kind of a Neil Simon-esque thing. And Charles Grodin plays his lonely pal, and it's one of the all-time great comedic performances. Grodin in this movie is so funny. But if you're a Steve Martin fan at all, if you're, if you love Only Murders in the Building, and maybe you're just getting into old Steve Martin, The Jerk, Three Amigos, and I think like Lonely Guys is one you can add to go back and discover too.
Like you said, not enough people know about it.
It's very sweet.
It is very sweet. It's a good movie. I like that one too.
All right, we're coming up on an hour here.
Yeah, so we should probably.
I'm going to blast through real fast the B movies and the So Bad It's Good movies from this first 6 months of 84 that I think are great.
Yeah.
So a few great B movies. Tank.
Oh.
Which I don't think you've ever seen.
No, I don't think so.
Which is James Garner owns a tank, and his son, C. Thomas Howell, is arrested on a trumped up BS charge. And Garner is he's a soldier, and he happens to own his own tank, and he uses the tank to bust C. Thomas Howell out of the clink, and then they run for the state border to try to get
a tank.
So it's a comedy.
It's genre busting again, I guess.
It's a wild movie. It's another one of those movies that was on HBO constantly.
Oh, interesting.
Razorback.
Yeah, I had that one.
Which is an Australian horror film about a giant razorback pig.
Yep.
Terrorizing the outback.
Yeah.
And yes, I know that sounds terrible, but
it's not though.
What saves it is it's an early movie by Russell Mulcahy, who went on to do Highlander and a lot of other movies. But one of the most sort of MTV of all the MTV directors, like really stylish.
Yeah.
And every frame of Razorback, weirdly for a movie about a giant killer pig, looks like something you might want to frame and put on your wall.
It's actually a really good looking movie.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Firestarter. Drew Barrymore. It's an adaptation of a Stephen King book about a little kid who can start telekinetically start fires.
Yep.
Stars a very strange childhood Drew Barrymore performance.
Yeah.
And George C. Scott is the villain. It's a really weird movie. It's not particularly good, but it's just it's kind of a fascinating watch. A Breed Apart, which is a truly unknown thriller with Powers Booth, Rutger Hauer, and Kathleen Turner, where
I think I have seen this.
This sort of battle over these rare bird eggs. Powers Booth has been hired to go to this island to secure these eggs for this. Donald Pleasance plays this eccentric millionaire who wants these eggs for his collection. It's an endangered species, so he has to go in and sort of and steal them.
Yeah.
And Rutger Hauer is the crazed veteran who lives on the island and sort of secures it, and it becomes this battle between the two characters. And Kathleen Turner is the woman kind of caught between them. It's an incredibly strange
what a cast
movie, but sort of transfixing in its own weird way.
So it was like this and Romancing the Stone for her this year.
Yeah.
That's pretty wacky. First half of the year too, because we're only in the first half.
Yeah. Then she went on to do Crimes of Passion, which we'll talk about soon.
Wow.
Under the, I would call so bad it's good category, or, just movies that aren't particularly great movies, but like
notable.
If you're in the right mood, are fun to watch. Tom Hanks' Bachelor Party.
Oh, that was
Adrian's Ned.
Oh my.
Mr. 80s. A truly terrible movie, but that everyone should see because you just won't believe your eyes that you're actually watching this movie and that this movie exists, which is Stallone and Dolly Parton in Rhinestone.
Yeah. I did have that on my list.
The premise of this movie, I haven't seen it in a long time. The premise of this movie, if I remember right, I saw this in the theater when I was a kid, by the way. My parents took me to this.
You went to see Rhinestone?
Yeah, I saw Rhinestone in the theater.
I'm trying to imagine seeing Rhinestone as a 9-year-old boy. Interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Dolly gets in a bet that she can turn anyone into a country singer. Yeah. And they're like, well, the next guy you see or whatever. And he's like this loud Italian cab driver.
I mean, he's Sylvester Stallone.
He's Stallone, essentially. He's playing himself. Yeah. And she tries to turn him into a country singer. And let's just say that the movie argues that she succeeds, but you be the judge.
No.
Conan the Destroyer, which is the sequel to Conan the Barbarian, which is nothing like Conan the Barbarian. It's almost like a children's film. Grace Jones is in it, Wilt Chamberlain.
Right.
It's really cartoony in a way that the first one was not. It's made by entirely different people than the people that made the first one, although Schwarzenegger is back in the title role. It's also a lot of fun. It was on HBO all the time when I was young. Children of the Corn, which is a movie that has launched, I think, 10 or 11 sequels at last count. Linda Hamilton, Peter Horton, based on a short story by Stephen King. Also not a good movie, but also just a lot of fun and like weirdly watchable. And as a kid who grew up amongst the cornfields of Illinois, it was kind of a big deal there. We used to play Children of the Corn as a game at our cookouts. When I would go to my friends' wiener roasts out in the country, we would all go out into the cornfields and hunt each other in the corn, and
these are very foreign things to an old New Yorker like me,
from New York,
but I get it.
A truly wretched movie, Hard to Hold, which is Rick Springfield's big kind of romantic, and I'm putting this in quotes, comedy.
Which one, romantic or comedy?
Well, both, I guess, for that matter. Yeah, it's terrible. But it's so 80s that it's one of those movies that you're like, yes, just let the 80s wash over me. I will say the music is great because Rick Springfield is awesome and all the songs in it are great and the concert scenes are great.
Yep.
But everything else that happens. And then the last one I'll mention. This is a cult classic. There are people out there who love this movie. It's a movie called Ice Pirates.
Oh, I was hoping you'd talk about.
Yeah,
Nice
it's a science
Pirates.
fiction movie. It's like Gregory Hines and Robert Urich, and Angelica Houston. A really weird
Wow,
cast
what a
of,
weird
and they are
cast.
like space pirates, and
They're all
water.
space pirates.
And water is the most valuable resource in the universe. So they're trying to steal ice essentially,
Okay.
and
Makes sense.
there's some very clever, goofy stuff in it. But it is like it's a profoundly weird movie. It would never be made today.
Wow.
Anyway, okay, so before we wrap up, rewindable moments real quick. So this is
This is going to be hard to do quick. There were
this is
so
our
many good ones.
favorite scenes from some of the movies of the first half of
Yeah.
1984.
It's going to be hard to
You
do
want to
this
just run
fast.
through yours really quick, and then I'll run through mine.
Yeah. Well, any of the concert scenes in Streets of Fire, any of the fight scenes in Streets of Fire.
Yeah, any of Streets of Fire. I picked the open just because I love the opening credits. I love that
Streets of
song,
Fire.
Nowhere Fast.
Yeah.
I think her performance is fantastic. I love how the motorcycle gang rides into town at the beginning. I love how Tom, the hero, comes home
Cody.
on the train, and the way they cut the credits, the actual graphics into the edit is really cool.
It's actually the perfect opener. Like, it really sets the movie up for you.
Yeah, it gets you psyched up to watch the movie.
So.
Yeah, because it's one of the great kind of openings of any movie, really. Period.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What else?
Well, Breakin' has a lot of rewindable moments. The one I will mention is the Venice Beach dance scene, during which you can see Jean-Claude Van Damme as an extra.
The fact that you can see Jean-Claude Van Damme as an extra in the background in a onesie is your favorite thing about the movie Breakin'.
It's pretty.
Can we say
come
that's
on.
true?
Isn't it most people's favorite thing about this movie? It's really. I mean, any of the dance sequences, the dance fight and Breakin', those are all really fun. Yeah. But I just had to mention Jean-Claude at Venice Beach. So, you want to do one?
I have a ton.
Yeah, I've got more than these.
Well, chime in
sure.
if any of these movies are on your list.
Yeah.
In Gremlins, the old lady in the electric stairs chair, and the Gremlins hot wired, and it shoots out of the house. Well. It's unbelievable. And then it cuts to these caroling Gremlins who are like wearing full Christmas.
Wow. There's a lot I've forgotten about Gremlins. I think I've seen
insane.
it once.
It's like it's like a very Joe Dante movie. It's like a Looney Tunes. It's insane.
Okay.
Karate Kid.
Yes.
I mean, there's a bunch of them, but the ones that stuck out to me, like just the Cruel Summer song when he's going into school the first time.
Yeah.
The fight with the skeletons where Johnny and his guys are dressed like skeletons.
Just the Halloween dance
Miyagi
in general.
comes to his rescue.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
The date at golf and stuff with Elizabeth Shue.
Yep.
His birthday where Miyagi gives him his gi and gives him a car.
Oh, yeah.
And then the scene that I think is really moving, the scene weirdly they almost cut out of the movie is the one where Daniel learns that Miyagi's wife and child are dead, and Miyagi is drunk. He finds Miyagi passed out and drunk, and
yeah.
he tucks him into bed. It's this very tender scene, and then he bows to his master before he leaves the room, and it's like it's just such a great. Without that scene, the end of that movie is not as moving as it is because the connection between you see the friendship between. It's
one of the most beautiful relationships in film. Yeah.
My favorite Spinal Tap scene is when they get lost on their way to the stage.
Yep. I have that one too.
I mean, you could pick anything, right? It goes to 11. You could pick Stonehenge.
I mean, I was going to bring up Stonehenge.
Yeah. There was a reproduction of Stonehenge on the stage that was in danger of being crushed to death by a dwarf. Isn't that the line?
When they lower down the Stonehenge and they notice and they realize how small it is. Oh, God.
Or where they play the where they play the USO event with like Fred Willard it's just like there's any scene from Spinal Tap is great.
Yep.
Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom, the scene on the bridge at the end where he tells Short Round to hold on, and she's like Kate Capsha's like, what'd he say? And Short Round goes, hang on, lady, we're going for a ride. And she's like, oh my God. It was just this great moment of realization of what he's about to do.
Right.
And
that's a good scene.
Which is chop that bridge in half.
Yep.
So that they all tumble to their deaths.
Yep.
The aforementioned scene where they break into the school in Reckless.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is one of the few kind of like steamy scenes in movies that I think is actually steamy. Most scenes I think in movies that try to be steamy end up being kind of embarrassing, but that one works.
I mentioned the school dance scene, but
Yeah.
I love that school dance scene too in Reckless.
There's a great scene in Ice Pirates where they get stuck in a time warp and all the characters age 50 years in a couple minutes. So their whole lives go by while they're trying to like, accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. It's a very funny scene.
Yep.
There's a line in Purple Rain that I just love every time, which is the heavy set club owner.
Okay.
He's yelling at Prince and he goes, "Nobody digs your music but yourself," which is not even true in the world of the movie, because every time Prince performs, the audience is going.
I mean, this is Prince,
insane.
everybody.
It wouldn't work. That line wouldn't work even if they portrayed the audience as rebelling against Prince.
Yeah, it's like not into it.
But
like
even in the movie,
it's hard to believe.
Yeah, nobody digs your music but yourself. What are you? Have you been in a different club, guy?
Yeah. That's really funny.
I had 16 Candles. There's the scene where the dad finally remembers her birthday and she's sleeping on the couch because her grandparents are there, and he wakes her up and he's like, "I'm so sorry, we forgot your birthday." And it's just this really tender, beautiful scene, which I think is maybe what people don't always remember about John Hughes, because his work was so funny that he could be really sentimental in a way that wasn't cheesy. It's really hard to write that kind of sentiment and not have it be corny. But if you think about the end of like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, with John Candy clutching his hat and remembering his wife, and that John Hughes could do that really well.
A lot of his movies had those sorts of moments.
What else did you have?
I had to have some Muppets Take Manhattan, of course.
I had that. Which scene did you?
Well, I had a few. The park scene with Gregory Hines, where Miss Piggy's purse gets stolen and she roller skates after them. The rats in the diner, that's really wonderful. And of course, the wedding scene at the end, which is actually makes me cry, which is crazy, but I love it too. Anyway, that's my Muppets Take Manhattan love right there. Lots of those.
What else?
What else do I have? Footloose has a ton of really windable moments. All those montages you were talking about.
That's another one that's hard for me to like.
You can't really pick one out.
Yeah, so teaching Chris Penn to dance. The scene where they sneak over the state line to go to the honky tonk
bar,
where he dances around the mill to Never, the song
Never.
The speech he makes to the town council. Leaping and dancing. They were leaping and dancing.
That's right.
It's unbelievable.
Actually,
Lithgow's beautiful scene where he gives them, where he's up on the pulpit and he gives them permission to have the dance, and then it cuts into the song "I'm Free" by Loggins.
Oh yeah.
I think what people, when I showed Footloose to my students in the class, none of them had seen it. Some of them had seen the remake, which was sad. The remake is fine, but you should see the original.
Yeah.
They were like, "Oh, this is going to be so cheesy. This is like, their idea of Footloose was that it was this really corny movie, and there is corny stuff in it, and there's stuff that's incredibly 80s in it. But I think what you maybe don't know if you haven't seen it, or if you haven't seen it in a long time, and what you might not remember is how great the John Lithgow stuff is,
really
and how
is.
great Lithgow and Diane Wiest are, and the fact that they hired these two unbelievable high caliber actors to play the roles of the parents just shows you how they weren't seeking to villainize those parents in the way that a lot of 80s movies made parents villains.
Yeah. I was just, the last time we watched it, which was not that long ago, I remember thinking a lot about that, how they really are, they're just parents who want to protect their children, and they're trying hard to do the right thing, and they care about their kids, and it pains them to see their kids unhappy, but also they're trying to, it's really multi-layered for something that you would not think was that.
And to the degree that you need a character to change, like you need a character arc in a movie, if you think about that movie, Kevin Bacon doesn't really have the arc. It's the Lithgow character that has the arc.
Yeah, that's really true.
Lithgow, you can see him struggling morally with his responsibility to his own kid and also to the town.
And his
as the spiritual leader of that town.
His flock. Yeah.
Yeah, you can see him struggling with wanting to do the right thing.
Yeah. And as an adult, I mean, maybe as a kid it would be harder to see that, but I think as an adult now you're like, wow, I totally get where he's coming from, and you feel for him very much. Yeah, it's true. Do you have you must have a Romancing the Stone moment.
I mean, I actually don't, because it's the whole movie. I don't know how I would pick a favorite
Yeah,
scene.
It's really hard.
I mean, there is no rewindable scene for that movie, because that movie
They're all so good.
It's a rewindable movie for me.
Yeah, just watch the whole thing.
Yeah.
Do you have any from Ghostbusters? I figured there's got to be some. But,
I don't. I mean, I love Ghostbusters. I think it's a great movie. I don't know what I would pick as my favorite scene.
Yeah,
I mean, I can think of the most famous scenes, but I don't know that those are necessarily my favorite scenes.
I always love when Bill Murray says cats and dogs living together.
Yeah, cats and dogs living together.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had the performance at Homecoming in Revenge of the Nerds.
Oh.
And because what's great about that scene where they play the song is that they're actually cool in that scene.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so the whole movie is like, they use their nerd powers to their superior intellect to get revenge on the jocks and the cheerleaders. But at the end of the day, they have to win whatever the hell it is, the Greek games or something, to seize control of the council of the school. And they do it not by some kind of like subterfuge or some kind of trick that they're playing. They just are cooler than the jocks. They do cooler stuff at the end of the movie. That song and their performance is cooler than the people they're competing against,
and more imaginative. Yeah, more creative.
So, I don't know. And it's such a fun song. The only other one I had was from The Natural, which is the ending of The Natural, one of the all-time great movie endings, where he knocks out the lights and all of the whole stadium goes dark and all the twinkling electric lights are drifting down to the baseball diamond. It's just a beautiful scene with that music, that incredible music. That
was the only thing I knew about The Natural before I saw it, and that's probably true of a lot of people, but it's worth it. It's a worthy, rewindable moment, even though it's like the one we all know, but it's definitely worthy of it.
Anything else before we sign off?
I don't think so. It's a big half of the year, man.
Yeah. Thanks for hanging with us. 84 is a beast.
Yeah. Well,
and we'll continue to be a beast, because the second half is also great.
Yeah, so we'll be back.
Just an unbelievable group of movies that came out in this one calendar year.
Yeah, so we'll be back to talk about the second half of 1984 next time.
All right, see you then.
You've been listening to The Long Rewind. The program is produced by Dustin Morrow and hosted by me, Lisa Molinelli. If you enjoy the show, please consider hitting the subscribe button, leave us a good review on your podcast app, and tell your friends about the program. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.